The concept of the perfect crime is a myth that haunts the minds of detectives and criminals alike in the dark world of homicide investigations. In the realm of forensic science, there is a fundamental rule known as the exchange principle, which states that every contact leaves a trace. When a perpetrator enters a crime scene, they bring something with them, and when they leave, they take something away. It might be a fingerprint or a drop of blood, or something far more subtle like a microscopic fiber. These tiny strands of material can tell a story that no witness ever could. They can bridge the gap between a suspect and a victim with terrifying precision. This is the story of how invisible threads wove a net around a killer. The setting for this harrowing sequence of events was the sprawling city of Atlanta, Georgia, during the late 1970s and early 80s. It was a time of transition and tension in the American South as the city modernized and expanded. The city was bustling with new development and a growing population, but a dark cloud was forming on the horizon. A series of disappearances began to plague the community, specifically targeting young African American children and teenagers. The fear was palpable in the streets as parents held their children close, and the police force found themselves facing a nightmare scenario. The vanished were often found days or weeks later in remote areas, their lives stolen by an unknown predator. The panic within the city grew with each passing week, as the list of missing children continued to expand without any clear answers from the authorities. Families were terrified to let their sons and daughters play outside, and a curfew was eventually imposed to try and protect the youth of the city. The local news broadcasts were dominated by the faces of the missing and the pleas of heartbroken parents asking for information. The pressure on the city administration and the police department was immense as the community demanded justice and protection. It seemed that a phantom was stalking the streets of Atlanta, picking victims at random and vanishing without a trace. Law enforcement officials organized a massive task force to address the crisis, bringing in help from federal agencies, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation. They interviewed hundreds of people and followed thousands of leads, but the killer remained elusive. There were no eyewitnesses to the abductions, and the crime scenes were often devoid of helpful physical evidence like fingerprints or weapons. The bodies were frequently discovered in wooded areas or rivers, which washed away many potential clues. The detectives were frustrated and exhausted, working around the clock to stop the murders but making little progress. They needed a break in the case that could link the victims to a single perpetrator. The breakthrough would not come from a witness or a confession, but from the meticulous work of forensic scientists examining the bodies of the victims. During the autopsies and subsequent examinations, trace evidence analysts began to notice a recurring pattern. They found strange yellow-green nylon fiber on the clothing and skin of several victims. These fibers were coarse and had a unique shape when viewed under a high-powered microscope. Alongside these green fibers, they also discovered violet acetate fibers on some of the bodies. This combination of microscopic evidence suggested that the victims had all been in contact with the same environment before their deaths. The forensic experts knew that fibers are mass-produced, and finding a common thread is not always enough to prove a connection. However, the specific characteristics of the yellow-green nylon fibers were highly unusual. They had a tri-lobed cross-section, which was not common in standard carpet manufacturing. The analysts deduced that these fibers likely came from a floor covering such as a rug or a carpet. The violet fibers appeared to be from a bedspread or a blanket. This gave the investigators a theoretical profile of the environment of the killer. They were looking for a person who had this specific green carpet and violet bedding in their home or vehicle. While the lab technicians worked on the microscopic clues, the police task force decided to change their tactics on the ground. They noticed that many of the bodies had been dumped in or near rivers, leading them to believe the killer was using the waterways to dispose of evidence. The police set up stakeouts on the bridges, crossing the Chattahoochee River, hoping to catch the perpetrator in the act. It was a long shot and required weeks of patience as officers sat in the darkness waiting for a sign. The tension was high as the team knew that another body could appear at any moment if they failed. For weeks, the officers watched the bridges from hidden positions, battling fatigue and boredom in the humid Georgia nights. They monitored every car that crossed the river looking for suspicious behavior. The operation was kept quiet to avoid alerting the killer, who seemed to be following the news coverage of the investigation closely. The river flowed silently beneath them, hiding its secrets while the city slept in fear. The detectives knew that this stakeout was their best chance to intercept the killer before another child was taken. They needed a mistake or a moment of carelessness to end the reign of terror. Then came the sound that would change the course of the investigation. In the early morning hours of May 22, 1981, a police recruit on a stakeout heard a loud splash in the water below the Jackson Parkway Bridge. He immediately alerted his team. A white station wagon was seen driving slowly across the bridge at that exact moment. The police mobilized instantly and stopped the vehicle a short distance away. The driver was a 23-year-old freelance photographer and music promoter named Wayne Williams. He appeared calm, but the timing of his presence on the bridge was incredibly suspicious. When questioned by the officers at the scene, Williams claimed he was crossing the bridge to meet a woman for an audition regarding a music group he was managing. He gave them a name and an address, but the story seemed thin to the experienced detectives. The police did not have enough evidence to arrest him for murder at that moment, so they let him go, but they placed him under constant surveillance. 2 days later, the body of a young man was pulled from the river downstream from the bridge. The medical examiner determined that the cause of death was asphyxiation, matching the pattern of previous victims. The discovery of the body in the river transformed Wayne Williams from a person of interest into the prime suspect. The police obtained a search warrant for his home and his vehicle. They were looking for anything that could link him to the victims, but the forensic team specifically was hunting for the source of the mysterious fibers. When they entered the home of Williams, they found exactly what they had been hoping for. The floor of his bedroom was covered in a distinct yellow-green carpet. On his bed was a violet bedspread. The visual match was striking, but visual similarity was not enough for a court of law. The investigators collected samples of the carpet and the bedspread, along with hair from the family dog, which was a German Shepherd mix. They rushed these samples to the crime lab to compare them with the evidence found on the bodies of the victims. The forensic scientists placed the fibers from the home of Williams side by side, with the fibers found on the victims under a comparison microscope. The results were chilling. The yellow-green nylon fibers from the carpet were optically and chemically identical to the fibers found on multiple victims. The violet acetate fibers from the bedspread also matched perfectly. The match extended beyond just the carpet and the bedspread. The dog hairs found on the victims were consistent with the hair of the dog owned by the Williams family. This created a triangle of evidence linking the suspect to the victims through his home environment. The probability of a random person having that specific carpet and that specific bedspread and a dog with that specific hair type was infinitesimally small. The investigators felt the net tightening, but they needed to prove just how rare that green carpet actually was to ensure a conviction in court. The Federal Bureau of Investigation took the lead in tracing the origin of the yellow-green carpet. They contacted major carpet manufacturers across the United States, trying to identify the specific make and model. After an exhaustive search, they located the manufacturer, a company called Wellman. The company confirmed that the fiber was a specific type called Luxaire, which had been produced in limited quantities. They learned that this particular color, called English olive, had been discontinued years prior due to poor sales. This information was crucial because it meant the carpet was extremely rare. The investigators went even further to calculate the statistical probability of a random home in Atlanta having this specific carpet. They analyzed sales records and determined how many square yards of the Luxaire English olive carpet had been sold in the entire southeastern region of the United States. They factored in the number of homes in the Atlanta area. The calculations showed that the odds of a random house in Atlanta containing this specific carpet were roughly 1 in 8,000. When combined with the violet bedspread and the dog hair, the odds became astronomical. The strength of the fiber evidence allowed the prosecutors to build a case against Wayne Williams, even without eyewitnesses or a murder weapon. They argued that the victims had been in the home or car of Williams and had picked up the microscopic debris from his environment. The fibers were the silent witnesses that placed the victims in his personal space. The police arrested Wayne Williams and charged him with 2 counts of murder. The trial that followed would be a landmark case in the history of forensic science, focusing heavily on the validity of fiber analysis. During the trial, the prosecution presented a complex web of fiber evidence, connecting Williams to not just the 2 victims he was charged with killing, but to 10 other victims in the same pattern. They used charts and enlarged microscopic photographs to show the jury the identical nature of the fibers. The visual presentation was compelling. The jury could see the unique shape and color of the threads that bound the suspect to the dead. The defense tried to argue that fibers are common and could have come from anywhere, but the statistical data presented by the experts was difficult to refute. The expert witnesses explained to the jury that fibers are easily transferred through contact. When a person sits on a carpet or a bed, thousands of microscopic fibers attach to their clothing and skin. These fibers can persist for days unless they are washed away. The fact that so many victims had the same combination of fibers was the key. It was not just one fiber on one victim. It was a consistent pattern across multiple crime scenes. This consistency pointed to a serial offender who was bringing the victims to the same location. The defense team attempted to challenge the science by suggesting that the carpet could be found in many homes and that the methods used to compare the fibers were subjective. They brought in their own experts to cast doubt on the uniqueness of the English olive carpet. However, the prosecution countered with the manufacturing records, which proved how little of that specific dye lot had been produced. The rarity of the material was the anchor of the entire prosecution case. It was a battle of science and statistics played out in a tense courtroom. The trial of Wayne Williams captivated the nation and brought the science of fiber analysis into the public spotlight. For the first time, many people understood the power of trace evidence. The jury listened to weeks of testimony regarding polymers and dye lots and cross-sections. It was a dense and technical trial, but the implications were clear. If the jury believed the fiber evidence, they had to believe that Williams was the killer. There was no other logical explanation for the presence of his carpet fibers on the bodies of the victims. After hours of deliberation, the jury returned with a verdict. They found Wayne Williams guilty of the 2 murders he was charged with. The judge sentenced him to 2 consecutive life terms in prison. The conviction was a major victory for the task force and the forensic analysts who had spent thousands of hours staring into microscopes. The police declared that the string of murders had stopped following the arrest of Williams, effectively closing the investigation into the other cases, although this decision remained controversial for decades. The conviction of Wayne Williams relied almost entirely on the strength of the fiber analysis. It established a precedent for how trace evidence could be used to solve complex serial killer investigations. It demonstrated that a lack of traditional evidence like fingerprints or weapons did not mean a case was unsolvable. The science of the small had proven to be just as powerful as a smoking gun. The case became a textbook example for forensic students studying the importance of Locard's exchange principle. In the years following the trial, the field of forensic science continued to evolve. DNA analysis eventually became the gold standard for identification, overshadowing fiber analysis in many ways. However, the principles used in the Williams case remain relevant. Criminals still leave traces of themselves behind, and forensic scientists still hunt for those microscopic clues. The technology has improved, allowing for even more precise chemical analysis of fibers and dyes, making it even harder for perpetrators to hide their connection to a crime scene. The legacy of the Atlanta child murders and the Wayne Williams case is complex and painful. While the fiber evidence was strong enough to secure a conviction, many families of the victims felt that justice was incomplete. Questions lingered about whether Williams was responsible for all the deaths attributed to the pattern. However, the forensic link established by the green carpet fibers remains one of the most significant achievements in the history of criminalistics. It showed that science could provide answers when traditional detective work hit a wall. The green carpet fibers and the violet bedspread fibers are still stored in evidence archives as a testament to the investigation. They serve as a reminder of the time when the entire city of Atlanta lived in fear, and how a few tiny strands of nylon helped to end that terror. The meticulous work of the FBI agents and the Georgia State Crime Lab set a standard for thoroughness that is still admired today. They turned the mundane materials of a home into a damning fingerprint that the suspect could not erase. Modern forensic experts often look back at the Williams case as a defining moment for the discipline. It highlighted the need for robust databases of manufactured materials like carpets and automotive paints. It underscored the importance of statistical probability in court testimony. The case taught investigators that they needed to look beyond the obvious and pay attention to the microscopic debris that covers our world. Every thread has a potential story to tell if someone is willing to look close enough. The story of the fiber analysis in this case is also a warning to criminals. It reinforces the idea that it is impossible to interact with the world without leaving a record of that interaction. No matter how careful a perpetrator might be, they cannot control the shedding of microscopic particles. The clothes they wear and the rugs they walk on, and the pets they own are all potential witnesses against them. The silent testimony of physical evidence is often the most damaging of all. Today, the techniques used to catch Wayne Williams have been refined and expanded. Spectrophotometry and chromatography allow scientists to analyze the dye composition of a single fiber with incredible accuracy. If a similar case occurred today, the evidence would likely be even more overwhelming. The science has moved forward, but the foundation was laid by the detectives who traced a rare green carpet from a bedroom in Atlanta to a factory floor and finally to a jury box. The memory of the victims is preserved not just in the hearts of their families, but in the annals of criminal justice history. The investigation proved that society would use every tool at its disposal to find those who prey on the vulnerable. The microscopic fibers that linked the suspect to the scene were more than just evidence, they were the threads of justice. They ensured that the voice of the victims was heard in court, even after they had been silenced. The science spoke for them. Ultimately, the case stands as a monumental puzzle solved by persistence and science. It is a dark chapter in American history, but one that illuminated the path for future investigations. The invisible threads that bind us to our environment are unbreakable. For Wayne Williams, those threads formed a cage. For the city of Atlanta, they offered a measure of closure after a long and terrifying ordeal. The green fiber remains the enduring symbol of the investigation that stopped a killer.